handcuff you, begin an investigation.
Based on what?
Your imagination.
It was obviously a suicide.
Never trust the obvious.
Uncle didn't kill himself.
Before a lifetime of adventure came the adventure of a lifetime.
What's your name?
Holmes. Sherlock Holmes.
Steven Spielberg presents Young Sherlock Holmes, directed by Barry Levinson.
Young Sherlock Holmes is a retelling of the famous detective played by Nicholas Rowe and his partner John Watson played by Alan Cox. Unlike many other iterations of Sherlock Holmes, this one has a twist as Sherlock Holmes and John Watson are currently attending college. Young Sherlock Holmes is inspired by the work written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The film makes this apparent and emphasises the fact that it is purely inspiration and not at all canonically connected. While the cast might not be recognisable to most, the production team is star-studded with names such as Barry Levinson as a director who worked on films such as Rain Man, Good Morning Vietnam, and much more. Chris Columbus is the writer for Young Sherlock Holmes. He would recognise his work from the Harry Potter franchise, Home Alone 1 and 2, Gremlins, Adventures in Babysitting, and more. One of the film's producers is none other than Steven Spielberg, who worked on titles such as E.T., Jurassic Park, Jaws, Back to the Future, and a lot more. So the production team had arguably some of cinema's greatest filmmakers, which shapes up Young Sherlock Holmes to be a very promising film with a lot of evidence to back this up. The first scene in Young Sherlock immediately tells us what the premise of the plot will be about. We see a man getting hit by a blow dart and is drugged. And in an almost comedic shot, we see that he is hallucinating and eventually runs home, and the hallucinations become so strong it drives him to leap out of a window, ultimately killing himself. Then, in a strong contrast to that scene, we cut to the perspective of Watson, who is being narrated by an older version of himself.
School to close. I was being sent to a new one in the middle of term.
In this narration, we get a sense of the setting that will be taking place.
Now, I was in the heart of London at the height of the Victorian era.
Throughout the film, there are small details which make the world feel more alive, such as one of Sherlock Holmes' trademarks being that he plays the violin. And in the first scene where we see Sherlock Holmes, he is currently learning to play it. And in the same scene, we see the dynamic between Watson and Sherlock immediately, as out of frustration, Sherlock is about to smash his violin, which shows him to be rash and emotional. However, Watson stops him, which hints how Watson will play as Sherlock's voice of reason.
Stop! Isn't it valuable?
What's more important, its value or my sanity? I should have mastered the damn thing by now.
How long have you been playing?
3 days.
Well, perhaps you should be patient.
The film also has quite a bit of foreshadowing, like how when Sherlock is having his final fencing duel with his teacher and he gets cut, Sherlock and Watson later, halfway through the film, mention how it seems like the cut is never healing, which could then link to the emotional cut that Sherlock must have felt after figuring out the truth behind the killer and how betrayed he is. As well as that, during their actual final duel, where they are fighting to the death, that is another duel that will have permanent consequences, and nothing can heal from that. Another piece of foreshadowing is how early on in the film, when Sherlock and Watson are eating at the dinner table, Sherlock is asked,
Holmes, what about you? What do you want to be when you grow up?
And Sherlock looks out the window, sees Elizabeth, and says,
I never want to be alone.
which could then foreshadow Elizabeth's death later on in the film.
Elizabeth! Elizabeth!
Young Sherlock Holmes is a film that I believe accomplishes everything it sets out to do. It sets up our fan favourite characters and faithfully recreates them in a younger form. It's all thankful to the small details the film makes from what we know and love about the more standard versions of these characters. One of the best things about the film, I believe, is that the sets are very well designed and the use of practical effects. For example, the killer pastries and the chicken monster thing, the use of stop motion being superimposed on screen leaves this sort of goofy mess, which I find very charming. But even though this would usually take away from a film, the fact that these are supposed to be hallucinations adds to the effect because they feel otherworldly, and it helps it hold up. At the time, the film had a budget of 18 million US dollars. However, on release, it only made 20 million US dollars in America. But I don't think this reflects on the film's quality at all. I think the film is great at what it does, but I don't think it's a film that I would typically recommend to people. But if it's brought up, it's definitely a film that I would speak very fondly of.